Give a simple example. Article 24 of the Universal Declaration. Everyone has the right to rest, leisure, limitation of working hours, and periodic holidays with pay. But Article 25, everyone has the right to medical care and necessary social services. Well, what if you're a doctor and you say, well, I want to have my holiday and leisure, and I'm a patient, I say, well, I want to be treated. Each one of us is claimed to have a fundamental human right to enjoy that. And it's not an accident that there are many cases where doctors have been conscripted by socialist states and forced to provide medical services or denied the right to leave the country. Jeremy Waldron, who's another socialist thinker, and also I should point out a very nice person. He's a friend of mine. I disagree with him very strongly on things, but he's a decent chap and well worth learning from. He argues that under this theory, the welfare rights theory, which he embraces, rights will conflict. This is a bad thing from the liberal perspective. You don't want to have conflicting rights. You want rights that are what are called compossible, that make possible social coordination. He says that this multiplicity stands in the way of any single-minded, tidy, you know that English word tidy means everything is very clean and neat, or single-minded account of the way in which the resolution of rights conflict should be approached. Let's see why this is significant. This is very theoretical, but he responds to a classical liberal, Maurice Cranston. Cranston said, look, if it's impossible for a right to be realized, why call it a right? At the time that the Universal Declaration was written, and even today, it's impossible for everyone in the world to have holidays with pay. Extremely poor countries or people on the verge of starvation can't give them holidays with pay. So I said, why call that a human right? That's silly if it's impossible for it to be done. Waldron responded, and it's worth going for a moment through the logic of the socialist response. He says, well, for each inhabitant of a poor country, it is not the case that his government is unable to secure holidays with pay or medical care, education, or other aspects of welfare for him. Indeed, it can probably do so, and does, for a fair number of its citizens. Now notice the next section. Leaving it an open question who these lucky individuals are to be. I asked him, I said, Jeremy, if you're living in the Congo, do you really think it's just a matter of luck that Mobutu Sese Seko, the dictator, got all the good medical care? And was it just, what, did he win a lottery or something? But notice that it's just an open question who these lucky persons are to be. Or in Canada, which is a much nicer version, Canada is a lovely, great place, is it just an accident that the Prime Minister gets the best medical care? And the Prime Minister's family? And all of the leading politicians, and the average bus driver does not. But he brushed that aside. He points out that there's always enough wealth in any country for one person to get all these benefits. So it's just a question of who that lucky person is going to be. The problems posed by scarcity and underdevelopment only arise when we take all the claims of right together. That's a very important admission. Namely, they only arise when we live together in society. But the point of rights is to make it possible to live together peacefully in society. So what he's saying is, they only arise always. That's a very strange thing to say. They only arise all the time. Namely, when we live together, and we want all of our equal rights to be respected. But they can't be, because they'll conflict. He says, it is not the duties in each individual case which demand the impossible. Namely, one person in the country could have holidays with pay or go to Switzerland for medical treatment. It is the combination of all the duties taken together which cannot be fulfilled. To me, this is a fatal admission of the bankruptcy of this philosophy. That it means there cannot really be equal justice for everyone. You cannot fulfill all these rights. Someone's rights will be realized and someone's will not. I'll skip that. So we have this interesting point. By hypothesis, Ken and I have rights, and they conflict, according to the socialist view. By hypothesis, when the state decides which rights will be realized, it will be on the basis of something other than rights, because we assumed both of us have the right. So the state will use some other principle to determine whose right will be realized. This is not a state governed by law. It's not the realization of rights, it's power that's going to be exercised then. And think about it in the Malay case, in the Malaysian case. Which group is going to get the best benefits? The ones who are politically dominant or the ones who are not? When the state is going to be making these allocations, when the rights are incompatible. Are the groups going to come into conflict as a consequence of that? And we see lots of you could just let your imagination work on how this principle is going to work. I'll conclude then and skip over the last argument, which is a complex argument from jurisprudence. The argument is that all rights really are social rights. Maybe I can talk about that later. And just conclude, welfare rights are not human rights if they end at the border. They cannot be. They undermine the relationship between justice and rights. They convert a rights-based legal order into a power-based order, an order based on privilege and preference. They replace equal justice with mutual plunder and stealing from one another, and they transform rights from elements of independence, which is the original purpose of rights, into elements of submission, in which you're made dependent on the state rather than independent of the will of others. Under Bismarck's formulation, the point of this was to make people dependent on the state. So, I did have one last point. I will put it up here. How did people provide welfare without the welfare state? What's called mutual aid. And there's a great tradition in Islamic culture and society, waqf and zakat and others. These are very important institutions, quite independently of the state, in which people provide for members of their community and even for total strangers, because zakat often has also been used for people who are not immediate members of your community. These in America, these are some of these friendly societies. This is the ancient order of the foresters. They had very colorful uniforms and hats and so on. Created rituals that were designed to create forms of solidarity among their groups. You can see these particularly ridiculous hats that these men are wearing. Have any of you ever seen the American cartoon called The Flintstones? Okay? What do Barney and Fred do in the evening when they go off? Where do they go? To the lodge. The Buffalo Lodge. And they have the handshake and the big hats and so on. It used to be everybody went to these associations until the welfare state killed them off. Those cartoons were made in the 1950s and early 60s when these groups still existed. They've been essentially wiped out. All over the world there were such associations, not just the United States, but Germany, Europe, Latin America, Asian countries. Chinese society is full of these kinds of institutions and associations in which people take care of each other. It's called mutual aid, based on a horizontal approach rather than a vertical approach of state dependency or even charity. Charity is an important part of a free society, but even charity involves a certain superiority of the giver to the receiver. But mutual aid is a system of solidarity among people that binds them together in this fashion. So if you go to Britain, someone was asking about the National Health Service. Go to those great hospitals of the National Health Service. Who built them? Not the state. They were all built by voluntary associations called friendly societies and nationalized by the state. They were not in fact built or constructed by the state. They were built by working men's associations and later taken over by the state. So now the state says, we have delivered a hospital to you, but go to the cornerstone of the old building, and it's usually written who built it. It does not say National Health Service.